The observation deck of the orbital station was quiet except for the soft hum of the life support systems. Commander Teo stood near the large window, looking out at the vast darkness of space. In the distance, 3 sleek alien ships hung in the black void like metal needles. These were the Vexthar vessels, and their arrival had brought both excitement and tension to the human colony. Teo was a tall man with sharp features and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. He had served in the human Space Force for 25 years, and he knew the value of careful observation. The Vexthar claimed to be peaceful traders, but in his experience, first contact with any new species required caution and careful planning. Captain Mi-sun entered the observation deck with quick, efficient steps. She was younger than Teo, perhaps 35, with dark hair pulled back tightly and a calm face that rarely showed emotion. Mi-sun had been his second-in-command for the past 3 years, and Teo trusted her completely. She carried a datapad in one hand. "They are ready to begin the discussions," Mi-sun said, stopping beside him. "Ambassador Krival has requested the formal meeting in Conference Room 3. The Vexthar sent ahead their list of topics they wish to discuss." Teo turned from the window and took the datapad from her hands. He scrolled through the list slowly. Trade agreements, cultural exchange, shared scientific knowledge, resource sharing, all standard topics for a first contact meeting. Nothing that seemed concerning at first glance. "What is your feeling about them?" Teo asked, still looking at the datapad. Mi-sun was quiet for a moment before answering. "They seem confident. Perhaps too confident. When I spoke with their advance team, they asked many questions about our military strength, our weapon systems, and how many armed personnel we have on this station. It felt like they were taking inventory rather than engaging in friendly conversation." Teo nodded slowly. This matched his own suspicions. The Vexthar were smooth in their communication, friendly on the surface, but there was an underlying current of calculation in their questions. They were assessing humanity, judging whether humans posed any real threat to them. "Then we will be careful with what we show them," Teo said. "Come. Let us meet with our guests." The conference room was a large circular space with walls that displayed stars and the void of space. A long table sat in the center, and on one side sat 3 Vexthar. The aliens were a striking sight. They stood roughly 7 feet tall, with thin bodies that seemed almost delicate despite their height. Their skin was a pale gray color, smooth and featureless, except for 2 large black eyes that dominated their faces. Their hands had only 4 fingers each, and these fingers moved with precise, deliberate motions. Ambassador Krival sat at the center of the Vexthar group. He wore clothing that seemed to be woven from light itself, shimmering silver and blue. His voice was soft but carried easily through the room. "Commander Teo, thank you for your hospitality," Krival said, his thin lips moving slightly as he spoke. "We have traveled far to meet with your people. The Vexthar believe that cooperation between our species will benefit us both greatly." Teo sat down across from the ambassador, and Mi-sun took her place beside him. Other human officers lined the sides of the table, standing at attention. "We welcome you," Teo replied. "We too believe that peace and cooperation serve all our peoples better than conflict." "Of course," Krival said, and something that might have been a smile crossed his alien face. "We have observed that your species is still relatively young in terms of space exploration. We are far ahead of you in technology and knowledge. This is why we come not as competitors, but as teachers and friends." The way he said it, casual, almost offhand, made it clear what Krival truly believed. The Vexthar saw humanity as children who needed guidance, as primitives who should be grateful for the attention of a superior civilization. "We are always eager to learn," Teo said carefully. Kryval leaned forward slightly. Tell me, Commander, your species. How long have you possessed advanced technology? We developed electricity and basic machines about 200 years ago, Teo answered. We reached space travel about 80 years ago. Nuclear power came much earlier than our space program. Yes, yes, Kryval said with a wave of his hand. This is what we understood. You are a young species, still learning to control your basic impulses. But tell me something that has fascinated us. We have studied your history from the broadcasts you send into space. Your species seems to have a strong tendency toward conflict, violence, war. He said the last word slowly, as if it tasted strange in his mouth. The room became very quiet. This was the question beneath all the friendly words, the assessment beneath the diplomatic pleasantries. Every species has times of conflict, Teo said slowly. Yes, but your records show that humans have waged war almost continuously throughout your recorded history, Kryval continued. He gestured to another Vexthar, a large one with slightly darker skin. This is Kryval's strategist Shkar. He has reviewed your military history extensively. Your ancestors fought with sticks and stones. Later they developed swords and metal armor, then came explosives, bullets, and missiles. Now you possess nuclear weapons. Your history is a progression of violence becoming more efficient and more devastating. Tayo met Kryval's black eyes directly. He felt a small smile forming at the corners of his mouth. This was exactly the moment he had been waiting for. That is correct, he said calmly. We know war. We know violence. We have studied it, practiced it, and perfected it across many ages and many forms. This concerns us, Kryval said. A young, violent species is unpredictable. We wonder if you can be trusted. I understand your concern, Teo said. He leaned back in his chair, relaxed but confident. But you are asking the wrong questions. You wish to know if humanity is dangerous. The answer is yes. We are very dangerous indeed. But you should perhaps ask yourself a different question. And what question is that? Kryval asked, his black eyes narrowing. Teo's smile widened slightly. You should ask yourself what kind of dangerous we are. You see, Ambassador, I can tell you this with complete honesty. When it comes to combat, when it comes to warfare, I know all the forms. I know them intimately, Stone Age, medieval, or nuclear. I have trained in them. I have studied them. I understand them all. The Vexthar delegation exchanged glances with each other, their black eyes reflecting the light of the conference room. You speak with great confidence, Kryval said carefully. Not confidence, Teo replied. Fact. And if you truly wish to understand whether humanity can be trusted, I invite you to see this knowledge demonstrated, not in theory, but in practice. Perhaps then you will understand what we truly are. Misun watched her commander with growing understanding. This was why Teo had brought her here. This was the beginning of something that would change how the Vexthar saw humanity forever. Kryval was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. Very well, Commander. We accept your invitation. Show us what you speak of. Show us this knowledge you claim to possess. Teo nodded. Then we will begin tomorrow. And I think you will find the demonstration quite enlightening. The training arena was a large, empty space deep inside the space station. The Vexthar had been brought here early in the morning, and they stood behind a thick, transparent barrier that would protect them from the demonstration about to take place. Ambassador Kryval stood in the center of his group, his pale gray skin almost luminous under the bright lights. Beside him stood Shkar, the strategist who had reviewed all of humanity's military history. Commander Tayo and Captain Misun entered from the opposite side, accompanied by a man in simple training clothes. This was Lieutenant Hai-Il, and he was one of the finest martial artists in the entire human colony. Hai-Il was in his late 40s, with a compact, muscular build that spoke of years of dedicated training. His face was calm and focused, his dark eyes bright with concentration. "This first demonstration," Teo said, speaking loudly enough for all the Vexthar to hear, "will show you combat from humanity's earliest age, before we had weapons beyond stone and bone, before we had armor or any technology beyond what nature provided us. This is hand-to-hand combat, refined and perfected over hundreds of thousands of years of human survival." Hai-Il stepped forward into the center of the arena. He began to move slowly, showing the Vexthar basic stances and positions. His movements were smooth and controlled, but there was power behind every gesture. He demonstrated blocking techniques, striking motions, and movements designed to take down a larger opponent. "You see," Teo continued, "humans learned to fight without weapons long before we invented them. We fought predators. We fought each other. And we learned the most efficient ways to defeat an opponent using only our bodies." Krival watched with what might have been amusement. "Your warrior appeared small, and our Shkar is considerably larger and stronger. This will not be an interesting demonstration. It will only show us that your people are weak." Misun smiled slightly but said nothing. She had seen Hai-Il train many times. She knew what was about to happen. "Please, bring your warrior forward," Teo said politely. "Then you will see what I mean." Shkar stepped forward, crossing the line into the arena. The Vexthar warrior was indeed much larger than Hai-Il, at least a foot taller and much heavier. His movements were slow and deliberate, as if he were used to simply overpowering opponents with physical strength. Tai-O raised his hand. "Begin." Shkar charged forward with surprising speed for such a large creature. He clearly expected to simply grab Hai-Il and end the match quickly, but Hai-Il had been waiting for exactly this move. He stepped to the side with perfect timing, and as Shkar rushed past him, Hai-Il grabbed the alien's arm and used the Vexthar's own momentum against him. In one smooth motion, Hai-Il pivoted and threw Shkar over his hip. The large alien crashed to the ground hard enough to make the barrier shake. Air burst from his lungs. Shkar tried to rise, but Hai-Il was already moving. The human warrior struck 3 precise points on the Vexthar's body: the neck, the stomach, and the inner thigh. Each strike was calculated to cause maximum pain to specific nerve clusters that even alien biology seemed to share. Shkar dropped back down, gasping. Before Shkar could try again, Hai-Il placed his hand on the Vexthar's throat, not pressing hard enough to truly hurt, but hard enough to make the point clear. If he had wanted to, he could have ended this very easily. The entire demonstration had taken less than 30 seconds. "Point to the human," Teo said calmly. Hai-Il stepped back and helped Shkar to his feet. The Vexthar warrior looked shocked, confused, and injured. His movements were stiff and careful. Krival was silent for a long moment. The other Vexithar whispered among themselves, their voices making strange clicking sounds. "That was..." Krival began, then stopped. "How did your small warrior defeat our larger one so easily?" Teo gestured for Hai-Il to demonstrate some of the techniques he had used. As the human warrior moved through the motions slowly, explaining pressure points and leverage, Misun began to speak. "Thousands of years ago, humans had to hunt animals much larger than ourselves to survive," she said. "We could not use strength alone against a mammoth or a cave bear, so we learned to use intelligence, technique, and knowledge of the body. We learned where to strike for maximum effect. We learned how to use an opponent's strength against them. We learned that a smaller, faster, smarter warrior could defeat a larger one." A third Vexthar, who looked older than Shkar, stepped forward. His name was Vexnal, and he was clearly someone important in their delegation. "This is impressive as a technique," Vexnal said slowly. But surely your people moved beyond this primitive form of combat once you developed weapons. We did develop weapons, Teo agreed. But we never abandoned these skills. Every human soldier, even in our most advanced units, trains in hand-to-hand combat. We consider it essential knowledge, even in an age of firearms and missiles. Misun added, our historical records show that humans have been perfecting hand-to-hand combat for over 200,000 years. Think about that. 200,000 years of constant refinement. Every technique you see here is the result of countless generations of warriors testing what works and what does not. Hai-Il performed a few more moves, showing how a human could take down an opponent twice their size if they understood anatomy and applied technique correctly. He showed how to read an opponent's movements and predict what they would do next. He demonstrated how patience and precision could defeat raw power and speed. By the end of the demonstration, even Shkar seemed to have developed a reluctant respect for the human warrior. Hai-Il had shown him 3 different ways he could have killed the Vexthar if he had actually wanted to. The alien warrior understood that only Hai-Il's restraint had kept him alive. Kryval approached the transparent barrier, looking at Teo directly. How many of your people possess this level of skill? Not all humans, Teo admitted, but thousands in my military have trained extensively in combat arts. And those who have not received formal training still carry the knowledge in their DNA, you might say. Humans are born with instincts for fighting. It is part of what we are. I begin to understand, Kryval said quietly. You are not simply a young species trying to develop weapons. You are a species that has perfected combat itself. Not the tools of combat, but the act of fighting. Exactly, Teo said. And this is only the first form we know. There is much more to show you. As the Vexthar delegation was led out of the training arena, Misun stood beside Hai-Il. The human warrior was catching his breath, his muscles still tight from the encounter. That went well, Misun said quietly. They are beginning to understand, Hai-Il replied. But they still think this is about individual skill. Wait until they see what we can do when we combine this knowledge with other forms of warfare. Then they will truly understand what Teo means. Misun nodded. The first demonstration was complete. Teo's plan was working exactly as he had hoped. The Vexthar had come to this station believing themselves superior, certain that humanity was a species of dangerous but ultimately primitive creatures. Now they were starting to realize the truth. Humanity did not fight in just one way. Humans did not have simple, straightforward warfare. Humans knew violence in every form it could take, refined by thousands of years of constant practice and innovation, and the Vexthar had only seen the beginning. 2 days had passed since the hand-to-hand combat demonstration. The Vexthar had spent the time asking questions, reviewing human historical records, and discussing what they had witnessed. Now they stood at the entrance to the large cargo bay that had been converted into a different kind of arena. This space was designed to look like a medieval battlefield, complete with mock stone walls, practice shields, and various weapons arranged carefully on display. Commander Teo was waiting for them near the entrance. Beside him stood Sergeant Day-Wan, a man in his early 50s with a weathered face and the bearing of someone who had spent most of his life studying and practicing historical warfare. Day-Wan wore a simple shirt and pants, and he carried with him several swords and shields from different historical periods. The second form of human combat, Teo explained as the Vexthar approached, is what we call medieval warfare. This period of human history lasted for roughly 1,000 years, from around the 5th century until the 15th century of our calendar. During this time, humans fought with swords, axes, spears, shields, and armor. Ambassador Kryval studied the weapons carefully, his black eyes examining each tool of war. These are crude compared to what we have seen in your later historical periods. Why would you show us such basic technology? Daewon spoke for the first time, his voice calm and clear. Because what matters in warfare is not just the tool, but how you use it. A sword is simple. A shield is simple. But the technique of wielding them, the understanding of distance and timing, the knowledge of how to combine them with armor and tactics, this is where the real power lies. Kryval inclined his head slightly. Then show us. Teo gestured to another Vex-Thar who had been waiting nearby. This one was tall even for the Vex-Thar, with a more muscular build than most of his kind. His name was Kryval himself. The strategy leader had decided to participate in this demonstration personally. Sergeant Daewon will face you with a sword and shield, Teo explained. To keep this fair, we have set your energy weapon to a low power setting. It will hurt if it strikes Daewon, but it will not cause serious injury. The same is true of the sword. Kryval the strategist stepped into the arena. He held his weapon, a small device that fired blue energy pulses, with confidence. He had studied human medieval warfare from historical records. He believed himself prepared. The match began, and immediately it became clear that Kryval had made a significant mistake. He expected Daewon to fight the way a human with a sword might fight in an open field. But Daewon had something far more valuable. He had spent 30 years studying medieval combat in actual detail. He had learned from weapon masters. He understood the principles of defense and offense. Daewon held his shield in a specific angle, not straightforward but tilted slightly. This allowed him to see over the top while still protecting his body. His sword was held ready but not raised high. Instead, it was positioned close to his body in a defensive stance. Kryval fired his energy weapon. The blast headed directly at Daewon, but the human had anticipated the trajectory. He moved his shield smoothly, and the energy bolt was deflected harmlessly to the side. The blue light streaked across the cargo bay and struck the far wall. Impossible, one of the other Vex-Thar whispered. Kryval fired again, aiming this time for Daewon's lower body, where the shield did not protect him. But Daewon had spent years learning to predict exactly this type of attack. He moved forward and to the side, stepping inside the angle of the weapon. As the energy blast passed over his shoulder, Daewon brought his sword up in a smooth motion. The tip of the blade came to rest against Kryval's neck. "You are dead," Daewon said simply. Kryval stepped back, his black eyes wide with surprise and something that might have been anger. "Again," Teo said, "but this time Sergeant Daewon will explain as he fights." They resumed their combat, but now Daewon was talking as he moved. "When your opponent has a ranged weapon, you must either put something between you and the weapon, or you must get inside the distance where the weapon is most effective. The shield does the first. Moving forward quickly does the second." He demonstrated, rolling under another energy blast and coming up close to Kryval. From this distance, the Vex-Thar's weapon was nearly useless. You see, distance is everything in combat. A swordsman who understands distance can defeat a ranged weapon if they move correctly. Medieval warriors learned this principle over hundreds of years of testing it against each other. Daewon continued, showing how he could use the shield to protect himself, how he could predict the angles of attacks, and how he could maintain the exact distance needed to be safe while being close enough to strike. After 20 minutes of continuous combat, Daewon had scored 23 clean hits with his sword. Kryval had landed only 2 strikes with his energy weapon, both glancing blows to Daewon's arm. When the match ended, Kryval was breathing heavily, his movements stiff and careful. He seemed shaken by the experience. Captain Misun approached the Vex-Thar strategist. "What you just witnessed took Sergeant Daewon 30 years to master. He has spent his entire adult life studying medieval combat in extraordinary detail. He has read all of our historical texts, learned from masters, practiced with actual weapons, and tested his knowledge against others." She gestured around the cargo bay. During the medieval period, humans produced millions of warriors like this. Not all were as skilled as Day One, but all understood these principles. We fought in this manner for 1,000 years, constantly improving our techniques. Vexnal, the older Vexthar, approached the display of swords and shields. He picked up a simple sword, surprised by its weight. Your ancestors maintained this level of combat for such a long period. This suggests a deep mastery of combat principles. More than that, Daewon said. Medieval humans developed the first standing armies. We created entire military systems devoted to training soldiers to fight in this way. We built castles and fortifications specifically designed to defend against medieval attacks. We innovated constantly. The armor from the year 500 was completely different from the armor from the year 1500. Each improvement was a response to new threats and new weapons. One of the younger Vexthar asked a direct question. How many humans possess this level of skill in combat? Misan answered, in a large medieval kingdom, you might have 10,000 professional warriors trained to this level. Not all were as skilled as Daewon, but all understood the basics. In addition, the entire population had some level of combat training. Because human communities needed to defend themselves, Teo added, what you are beginning to understand is that humans do not simply discover better weapons and move on. We keep the knowledge of what came before. A modern human soldier can still fight with a sword if needed. We have not forgotten how to do it. The knowledge is still here, still practiced, still refined. Kryval stood in the center of the arena, looking at his weapon, and then at Daewon. I begin to see a pattern emerging. Your species does not learn one method of warfare and discard it when something better comes along. You add to your knowledge. Exactly, Teo said. We are not a species that has one way of fighting. We have many, and we have perfected each of them through thousands of years of continuous practice. As the Vexthar delegation left the cargo bay, their conversations among themselves were more subdued than before. They had come to watch a primitive form of combat. Instead, they had witnessed something more disturbing. Proof that humans had spent centuries becoming masters of warfare at every possible level of technology. What would happen when they saw the third demonstration? What would they think when they learned about humanity's most devastating weapons? The data center was a cool, quiet room filled with computer terminals and large screens. The Vexthar delegation stood in the center, looking uncertain. There were no weapons here, no warriors, no arena. They did not understand what they were about to see. Engineer Nari stood at one of the large screens, ready to begin her presentation. She was a woman in her early 60s, with gray streaking her dark hair and an intensity in her eyes that suggested a lifetime spent working with complex systems. Behind her on the screen were images of Earth, the Sun, and mathematical equations that even the Vexthar would recognize as containing enormous numbers. Commander Teo stood to one side with Captain Misan. What you are about to see, he said, represents the most devastating weapons humanity has ever created. These are our nuclear weapons. We have seen reference to these in your historical records, Kryval said. Weapons of immense power, but they are old technology now. You have moved beyond them. Have we? Nari asked. Let me show you something. She touched a control, and the screen filled with images. They showed a city before an explosion and after. The city was completely gone, reduced to ash and smoking ruins. The area covered was enormous, spreading for miles in all directions. This, Nari said, is what happened to the city of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. A single nuclear weapon, what we now call an atomic bomb, destroyed it in an instant. Between 70 and 80,000 people died immediately. By the end of the year, the death toll reached 140,000 people. The Vexthar were silent. That was only the beginning, Nari continued. She showed more images, more information, more numbers. After this first bombing, humans developed more powerful nuclear weapons. We created thermonuclear weapons, Hydrogen bombs that were thousands of times more powerful than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. Vexnall leaned forward, studying the numbers on the screen. These calculations show that a single weapon of this type could destroy an area the size of a large city. How many of these weapons do your people possess? That, Nari said, is where it becomes truly interesting. At the height of the Cold War, between 1960 and 1990, humanity possessed approximately 100,000 nuclear weapons. The Vexthar delegation made sounds of shock and disbelief. One of them actually stepped backward, as if physically recoiling from the information. 100,000? Krival repeated, his black eyes growing larger. You possessed 100,000 weapons of this destructive power? Yes, Nari said. And here is the most important part. These weapons were not all stored and hidden away. They were actively deployed. They were loaded onto planes, ships, submarines, and missiles. At any given moment during this period, several thousand nuclear weapons were ready to be fired within minutes of an order being given. She pressed another control. The screen now showed a map of Earth, with hundreds of red dots marking nuclear weapons positions. These red dots represent just the known nuclear weapons that existed in the year 1985, Nari explained. Humanity had built a system so fragile, so unstable, that if one mistake had been made, if one person had made one wrong decision, the entire planet could have been destroyed in an afternoon. Engineer Nari paused, letting this information sink in. Then she continued with an even more disturbing thought. What makes this even more significant is that humans developed all of this while they were still fighting each other. While humans possessed 100,000 nuclear weapons, we were still fighting conventional wars with traditional weapons. We were still studying medieval combat techniques. We had not abandoned our earlier forms of warfare. We had simply added nuclear weapons to our arsenal. Teo stepped forward. Let me make this very clear. During the period when humans possessed these nuclear weapons, we had soldiers trained in hand-to-hand combat in the same military forces that operated nuclear weapons. We had pilots trained in medieval sword techniques, theoretically, if they needed to survive an airplane crash behind enemy lines. We never forgot how to do things the old ways. We simply added to our knowledge. This is madness, one of the younger Vexthar said. How did your species survive with such dangerous weapons, at such unstable peace? We almost did not survive, Nari admitted. There were at least 3 incidents that came very close to starting a nuclear war. We were lucky. We were also forced to develop discipline and control. We had to create systems and protocols to prevent accidental nuclear war. In a way, we grew up as a species because we had to. Krival studied the screen, his expression unreadable. How many of these weapons does humanity still possess? Approximately 14,000, Teo answered. We have reduced our arsenal significantly in the past decades, but we still maintain enough to cause massive destruction. And you all live on the same planet, Vexnall said slowly, understanding dawning in his black eyes. You developed these weapons while living in close proximity to your enemies. You built them, stored them, maintained them, and somehow did not destroy yourselves. That is correct, Teo said. And that brings me to the most important point I wish to convey. You came to this station and asked if humanity could be trusted. You seemed to believe we were a primitive species with weapons, rather than a species that has mastered warfare at every level. Nari pulled up one more image on the screen. It showed a single nuclear weapon. The image included specifications, technical drawings, and mathematical calculations of its destructive power. Here is what humanity has achieved, Nari said. We can kill with our bare hands, using techniques perfected over 200,000 years. We can kill with medieval swords and shields, using knowledge refined over 1,000 years. And we can kill with nuclear weapons, using science we discovered only 80 years ago. We have not abandoned any of these methods. They all still exist. They are all still practiced. They are all part of what humanity is. One of our people, Teo said, looking directly at Krival, can defeat your warrior in hand-to-hand combat with ease. Another of our people can master medieval weapons to a degree that your strategist cannot match. And millions of our people understand nuclear physics well enough to build weapons that could destroy continents. Mi-sun added her own observation. We are a species that remembers everything. Every form of combat we have ever mastered remains in our culture, in our training programs, in our DNA. We add new knowledge instead of replacing old knowledge. We became powerful not by specializing in one form of warfare, but by learning to master all forms. The Vexthar delegation stood in silence for several long moments. The implications of what they had just learned seemed to be settling upon them like a heavy weight. Finally, Vexnal spoke. You said earlier that you know all three forms, Stone Age, medieval, and nuclear. Now I understand. You are not speaking about the technological progression of weapons. You are saying that humanity has retained mastery of all three stages simultaneously. Now you understand, Teo said with satisfaction. This is why I said I know all three. This is what you needed to learn about humanity. As the presentation ended and the Vexthar delegation was escorted from the data center, their demeanor had changed completely. They no longer carried the air of superiority they had possessed when they arrived. Instead, they seemed troubled, thoughtful, and cautious in a way they had not been before. What they had seen was not a demonstration of a single dangerous weapon or a single powerful technique. What they had witnessed was proof that humanity was a civilization that had mastered the complete spectrum of warfare, from the most basic to the most advanced, and had not forgotten any of it. The lecture hall was arranged in a semicircle, with the Vexthar delegation seated in the front rows. Dr. Ray stood at the front, preparing her presentation on a large screen. She was a biologist and historian, a woman in her mid-50s with intelligent eyes and a way of speaking that made complex ideas seem simple and clear. Beside her stood Commander Teo and Captain Mi-sun. They had arranged this final presentation to help the Vexthar understand not just what humanity could do, but why humans were the way they were. Dr. Ray began without introduction. The question I want to answer for you today is this. Why does humanity possess mastery of so many different forms of warfare? Why has our species retained knowledge of combat techniques from tens of thousands of years ago, even while developing nuclear weapons? To answer this, I must take you back into human history. She pressed a control, and an image appeared on the screen showing primitive human ancestors hunting a large animal. 200,000 years ago, human ancestors developed the first sophisticated hunting strategies. Before this, we were prey animals, hunted by predators. But something changed in our brains. We became capable of planning, strategizing, and coordinating our actions. This allowed us to hunt animals much larger than ourselves. Dr. Ray moved through a series of images showing human evolution, human development, and human warfare through different ages. What is important to understand is that human survival never came from possessing the strongest bodies or the fastest running speed. We were not the fastest, the strongest, or the most physically capable animals on our planet. Our survival came from intelligence, from planning, from learning, from experience, and from the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. A Vexthar in the audience raised a hand. You are saying that your species survived not through physical superiority, but through mental superiority. Correct, Dr. Ray said. And this is crucial to understanding our approach to warfare. When humans fought, we did not simply rely on strength. We learned tactics, techniques, and methods that allowed smaller, weaker humans to defeat larger, stronger opponents. We learned to read body language, to predict movements, to use psychology to gain advantages. She showed images of ancient human weapons, the spear, the bow, the trap. Each was designed to overcome physical limitations through ingenuity. As human civilization developed, we encountered many different environments and many different enemies. A human tribe living in forests learned to fight differently than a tribe living in mountains or deserts. A tribe facing predators learned different techniques than a tribe facing other humans. Over thousands of years, humans accumulated this knowledge. We did not throw away the old methods when we discovered new ones. We added new methods to our existing knowledge. Dr. Ray moved her presentation forward in time. When humans developed agriculture, approximately 10,000 years ago, something important happened. We suddenly had resources to protect. We built settlements, grew crops, and accumulated possessions. This led to organized warfare, groups of humans fighting groups of other humans for control of resources. Images appeared showing medieval warfare, castles, armies, and formal military structures. During the medieval period, humans developed professional warriors who trained for their entire lives. They studied not just how to swing a sword, but how to understand their opponent, how to position themselves, how to predict what would happen next. This was not crude fighting. This was the refinement of combat technique over centuries. Captain Meeson added her own observation. What Dr. Ray is explaining is the principle of adaptation. Humans do not fight only one way. We adapt to our circumstances. When we developed better weapons, we learned how to use them. But we did not forget the old ways because the old ways still worked. You might face an opponent who disarmed you, and then you would need to fight hand to hand. You might face someone with armor, and then you would need to understand where their armor had weaknesses. Exactly, Dr. Ray said. Human warfare is based on the understanding that you must be prepared for many different situations. An ancient human might encounter an opponent with better weapons, so they needed to know how to fight at close range. A medieval warrior might lose their sword, so they needed to understand hand-to-hand combat. A modern soldier might find themselves in a situation where their advanced weapons are not useful, so they still train with older methods. Vexnal, the older Vexthar, asked a penetrating question. Is this principle of adaptation the reason you did not destroy yourselves during your nuclear age? Dr. Ray turned to face him directly. That is an excellent question, and the answer is complex. Humans did develop a system of maintaining nuclear weapons while simultaneously building diplomatic and negotiation systems to prevent their use. We created international agreements, arms control treaties, and communication systems specifically designed to reduce the risk of accidental nuclear war. We adapted our behavior to fit the situation. She advanced her presentation to show charts of human arms control treaties, international agreements, and the reduction of nuclear weapons over time. After the Cold War ended, humans deliberately chose to reduce the number of nuclear weapons. We still possess them. We understand that they are powerful deterrents against other forms of conflict. But we made a conscious choice to move away from the brink of mutual destruction. Ambassador Kryval leaned forward. You are suggesting that your species deliberately chose not to use its most powerful weapons? Not chose, Dr. Ray corrected gently. More like became wise enough to understand the consequences of using them, and also adapted our thinking about what strength means. We realized that the ability to destroy the world was not the same as security or success. So we found new approaches. Mi-sun continued the explanation. What you must understand is that adaptability is not just physical for humans. It is mental and cultural. We adapt our thinking when circumstances change. We retain knowledge of old methods while embracing new ones. We use whatever tool works best in a given situation. But there is something else, Dr. Ray said. Something even more important. The reason humanity has retained mastery of so many different forms of warfare is because we have always competed with each other. Different human groups have fought each other throughout our history. This competition drove innovation and advancement. We never had a single universal military doctrine because different humans discovered different techniques that worked. She showed examples of different fighting styles from different human cultures, all of which had independently developed similar principles despite having no contact with each other. This suggests something profound, Vexnall observed, that the principles of effective combat are universal, that whether a human learned to fight in one culture or another, they arrived at similar conclusions. Correct again, Dr. Ray said, and this is why humans are so adaptable. We are not locked into one way of thinking about warfare. We have explored many approaches and found that multiple approaches work. This makes us flexible, creative, and difficult to predict. Teo added one final observation. What all of this means is that humanity is not a species that can be easily intimidated or conquered. We do not rely on a single weapon or a single technique. We rely on knowledge, adaptability, and the understanding that there are many ways to solve a problem. Even if someone took away our nuclear weapons, we would still be formidable. Even if someone destroyed our modern technology, we could still fight effectively with medieval techniques. Even if someone stripped everything away, we could still fight with our bare hands using techniques refined over hundreds of thousands of years. The Vexthar delegation sat in silence, absorbing this information. They had come to understand that they had misunderstood humanity completely. They had thought humans were a single type of warrior with a single type of weapon. Instead, they had discovered that humanity was a civilization that understood warfare at every conceivable level, and that this understanding made humans not desperate or primitive, but versatile and powerful. Dr. Ray looked at them seriously. I hope this helps you understand why Commander Teo said he knows all three. It is not a boast. It is simply the truth about what humanity has become through our long history of learning, adapting, and never forgetting what came before. As the presentation ended and the Vexthar delegates filed out, their conversations were serious and thoughtful. They were no longer thinking about how to deal with a primitive species. They were thinking about how to interact as equals with a civilization that had mastered the complete spectrum of combat and warfare.